Hey everyone, and welcome back to another roundup. We've got a lot to talk about. Sony have delayed The Last of Us 2 indefinitely. Activision have won a big lawsuit, one that in terms of case law has got fantastic implications for gaming. Then past that, the impact of the global situation on many aspects of gaming, and a peek behind the curtain on how it's actually impacting us and YouTube, and I'll share with you some back-end numbers behind this channel to help with that. So, should be an interesting one. Now, loot. Do you want loot? Well, if you love fantasy stuff as we do, then I've got some good news for you. There is a lot of physical loot now on our Patreon. This year, we're going with fantasy races and classes. So April is trolls and priests, plus a special space. So you'll get a pre-order for the priest pin. For a comparison, here's what the hunter one looked like. So real shiny stuff. Then the jungle. It's gorgeous. The kick-ass raptor. And the Snord. Yes, it is a snake and a weapon and a sticker. Plus, to celebrate TBC Classic, our send-off of science fiction fantasy art. All of that plus the usual early content and daily briefings. As I said earlier, look, revenue's halved. Your support here is vital, but really what's important for us is that we're always giving you back something good in return. And we aim to have the best ran, best value Patreon with the most stuff on it, one where you get something to look forward to in the mail every month if you're on that tier, and where you at least are getting daily content to enjoy in between then. So, thank you for all of our supporters over the last week. It's been incredible. You are literally securing jobs in a rough time, and if you want more info on that, then yeah, I'll share some numbers later on. So, with that, let's get into the gaming news. First up, we've got understandable news. The Last of Us Part 2 has been delayed indefinitely. In their statement, Sony blamed logistical problems preventing them from, quote, providing the launch experience that players deserve. I mean, I think we all know, obviously, what's going on here. Now, Naughty Dog are hoping that it's not going to be too long of a delay, but they say they wanted everybody to be able to play the game around the same time, and I suppose the current sourcing issues for getting things out to people will be an issue there. Now, sources have told Kotaku that the game is essentially done, and it was on track for its May release. Now, this delay is because of the challenge of printing, shipping, and selling physical games in this current climate. The delay will likely last until Sony are confident that they can just do an unimpeded physical release. Now, I've got to be real with you on that, on this current big issue going on in the world that we can't say because, the keyword sort of tips off YouTube and then you get demonetized. I mean, not that ad rates are even, they're barely worth anything at this rate, but that's going to be quite a long time from everything that I understand, especially as we deal with the possibility of a wave 2. So yeah, I'd actually expect that to be quite an issue. Now, in terms of why they've made this decision, where say for Animal Crossing or maybe some other games, a similar decision hasn't been made, I think it's really Sony seeing the writing on the wall for the state of, I'd say probably the state of the USA by the time that game would come out. Right now, the US is, it is in that fast growth part of its curve, but track that forward a significant amount of time and you're going to pretty much have hardcore lockdown, and that really is going to hurt for a physical product like The Last of Us. And you've also got to remember that, from what I understand, in the USA, that is a territory where there is still a lot of people who do buy physical. Now, in the UK, physical's really been dwindling and digital's really been growing, but from what I understand, the state of internet in terms of people having data caps and people in rural areas who just have really slow internet, that basically means that in the US, loads more people actually do physical, I think on a per capita basis. That's just what I understand. I could be wrong, but given that and the size of the US as a market for that game, yeah, I think the Sony decision here does make quite a bit of sense. And then the final point in this story, Jason Schreier also says that going remote has not prevented crunch at the studio. Of course, Naughty Dog is pretty renowned for crunch, and that's especially hitting the QA department. So there you go. Hopefully this delay means that the QA people will just have a little bit more time, that ultimately those people will be happy, and we, consumers, will get a less buggy product upon its release. Okay, next up, the impact of the current situation on digital media. Now, if you're only in this video for the games content, then I have provided timestamps down below in the pinned comment if you want to jump about past this. Now, for me, look, I always want to be transparent with you about how YouTube actually works for all creators, and I want to let you actually see and know how the sausage is made. So, On this platform, things have been impacted in two different ways. First off, mentioning the name of the global situation, that gets you auto-demonetized. That's happened to us twice. Then second, ad rates have fallen off a cliff, at least for us. Now take this past Roundup episode. Being a multi-topic video, it took 5 to 6 hours to write and research from one of us. Then it took me between sort of 3 and 4 hours to research, do some reviewing, do some writing, and also do some recording. Then 4 to 5 hours for editing, and that's all managed by our producer, Matt. So you're looking at like 12 to 15 man hours for about $170. So I mean, like, once you convert the dollars into pounds and take away the payment processing, it's literally below minimum wage for here. So for a team like us, that's below breaking even. And that's where, for an example, say the Patreon support for the physical loot and the daily briefs has really helped us out. Now, assuming that this slashing of ad rates is happening across the whole industry, then this broadly speaking means two things for us. A, it means that smaller creators who earn just enough to get by will now be in the red. B, it means that larger YouTube teams who are running close to their monthly burn rate will be in the red. And depending on how long this lasts, I mean, you could see a fair few teams or even channels disappear or have to scale back. Then actually just comes to me as I'm recording this, there are a lot of creators who will maybe do 2 videos a month, right? Like, those ones, the kind of creators, like, you're waiting for one of their videos, it drops, and as soon as it drops, you're like, wow, you're on there, because you only get 2 a month. Well, for a lot of those people, those videos would do hyper well, but because they're only doing 1 to 2 videos a month, all their eggs are in that one basket. So they're in a particularly rough situation where a few months of bad ad rates could massively cut down what they're actually getting there, which, I mean, yes, could lead to some channels either disappearing, having to take breaks, or just scaling back a bit. Now, of course, the real value, at least of this segment, is explaining how this actually happens, and it's basically all because of consumer demand. Advertising is not a big priority right now for many different companies. Many of them actually can't even do business, yet the supply of advertising spots right now is pretty much about the same. YouTube adverts rely on a supply-demand bidding auction system with Google AdWords, and if you'd like to learn AdSense, even if you want to learn more about that, this is such a great video. It's by one of my favorite channels, CGP Grey, and he breaks it down real good. So overall, ad rates are a good indicator of how much people are actually generally spending in the consumer market, and therefore, yeah, the health of the economy. Like, I'm seeing estimates of 10% unemployment right now in the US, and we recently saw 2 weeks of record unemployment claims over there. Now, of course, this is only the beginning of America's ascent up that curve. And the US market actually does drive a very large portion of YouTube revenue from the majority of channels you'd watch, especially because, I mean, there's a lot of Americans, right? It's a high population area, and it's also a strong consumer market. For this channel, 38.5% of views come from the US, and the next biggest is 8.3% from the UK. And yeah, that does mean that the US dominates, and that explains why ad rates have been falling faster in the last, say, 2 weeks than they were in the time before that, when we were primarily dealing with, say, Italy and South Korea. Now that's hitting the US, it's beginning to hit a lot more of the advertising scene, at least with this sort of global YouTube market, it would seem. So overall, I mean, it certainly is an interesting glimpse into the side impacts of a situation like this on the global economy. It shows how everything is indeed interconnected, and I think importantly, it is proof of the need to be agile and to diversify. Digital media is luckier than most in this case. I mean, if you look at OpenTable reservation numbers, you can see it really is quite dire. I mean, at least if you run a distillery, you can switch over to making hand sanitizer and stuff like that pretty easy. But I mean, if you look at the restaurant industry, the services industry, those shocking numbers, I mean, they do make sense. So I hope this segment gave you a bit of a look into how the sausage is made in YouTube, how it impacts teams. We're in a situation where if this channel was twice the size that it is, it was sort of maybe getting like average Young Yev views, or maybe a little bit under that, we should be fine. But right now we are just a little bit fresh in the scene that this does sting a little bit. Overall though, that's the situation. I think it's best just to be open and explain all of our situation with you. I'd love to hear any personal stories you've got on how this situation is impacting you, impacting your job, your friends, your family. Yeah, just, it would be nice to read stories, and I think sometimes talking about that stuff can just be cathartic and sort of helping you, just deal with it. Anyway, With that said, let's hop back to the games. Next up, we've got a First Amendment victory for Activision, who have, yes, emerged victorious from a trademark dispute with AM General, the US government contractor for Humvees. Now, this actually does matter a lot for you in games, so bear with me. Basically, AM General launched the suit in 2017, claiming that COD players had been deceived into believing that AM General had issued an official license for the Call of Duty games. You know, as if anyone would actually care about that anyway. Now, Activision disputed this on the basis of freedom of expression, and it went in their favor, with the judge ruling that depicting vehicles employed by actual militaries has artistic value in the pursuit of realism. And that's an important precedent. That's good case law for our industry. Without going too much into it, Activision's basically the game passes the Rogers test. Now, while you may think this is just some cars in a Call of Duty game, well, this decision sets precedent, and case law is a very important thing. So, you know, if you think about it, major studios, they've often avoided having real-life equipment or weapons without approval. EA got in trouble with a helicopter manufacturer over Battlefield 3. So, the pursuit of realism in games being defended as an artistic goal, not being tied into freedom of speech, well, that does give a lot more peace of mind when it comes to making those decisions. And even if the Humvee case looks like a bit of a cash grab from AM General, it's actually good to see games being treated like this by the courts, right? Like, it was actually treated as, yeah, this is just a part of art. This is something that you basically, like, if you want to do a war game and you want that type of vehicle, you got to use the Humvee, right? So this is good. This is really good as we track it forward. I know that, I mean, I don't really care about it in Call of Duty. You probably don't. But for all of us, I think that is actually really important. So good stuff, and let's move on. All right, so Phil Spencer, Xbox boss, opened up to IGN, basically encapsulating their pro-consumer-ish approach in how he basically said he learned to respect the gamer. And I think you really can tell that from how they operate things. Now, on the Series X, holiday 2020 is still the plan, and Phil is confident they will actually make that window. He also said that the launch would not be delayed for any individual game, so they are going full steam ahead. Right now, of course, that launch lineup is only Halo, and when Phil was actually pushed for details there, he kind of refused to give any, and he maintained that it's less about day one and more about a sustained stream of great games. And he actually thinks that the Xbox One had too many strong titles on its launch day and would have been better just to pace them out a bit. So that's what's going on there. Now, that's not to say there won't be loads of games. Phil did say that Microsoft have so many games, they'll have things to announce every time they get on stage. Now, competition-wise, this is what a lot of us have been thinking about. Phil thinks that they've got a winning plan for competing with Sony, and that actually revolves around pricing. Basically, considering the performance capabilities of the Series X, Spencer feels, quote, incredibly strong about the price they'll be able to achieve. And I think what that essentially means is they've got enough of a bottom end on what they can do for price that they're just playing chicken with Sony, and that probably does bode well for consumers. Now, spec-wise, Phil said that he felt really good after the PS5 tech demo, and he did praise Sony's audio and SSD tech, but overall he says that he feels great about how the Series X stacks up. Phil then also put another nail in Scalebound's coffin, which is of course a bit sad, and he also, and I love this, he admitted that the xCloud experience is never going to beat local, but that it's got other use cases. And I think it's really interesting, right? We've just seen here, the people who are doing, I'd say overall, the best valued streaming service, they seem to be the ones who actually understand streaming's weaknesses, rather than going with, say, Google-like delusion in claiming that it is the future. So overall here, it seems like Xbox have a winner in principle, but I think we all know the struggle that they're going to have. Games. Spencer better be right about the number of games they've got cooked up, and unlike last gen, you know what, they're actually going to have to be great from day one. And that's going to be a real struggle against Sony, who've got a proven track record in that field. Okay, next up, Bethesda have pulled out. Yes, Pete Hines, you know, the man who lied and then cried about being called a liar, confirmed that they're not doing an E3 presser. Many companies actually are still doing something digital for E3, so in a way this is, yes, a notable absence, especially considering that they did plan to show Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo. Pete said that it's essentially down to the challenges presented by the current situation, and instead they're going to drop game details over the coming months. Now, if we think about why here, I mean, like, what's going on? And then also, will Bethesda just be lost and forgotten here? On the latter point, maybe, but I don't think it's going to matter if Ghostwire and Deathloop actually show well. As for the why here, I'd imagine it actually just comes down to them being a bit behind schedule. Look, teams often in good situations end up having to crunch to make an E3 deadline, and that's what happens when we're not dealing with a global shutdown and all the slowdowns associated with that. So yeah, I imagine that the planned show floor demos and demo videos just weren't where they needed to be. So for Bethesda, I'd say a bad or forgettable showing would be worse than no showing. So on balance, it's probably the right move for them. And next up, we've got April Fools, but in a way that actually, I guess, is actual news. So Platinum Games didn't really do April Fools that well. They're basically a great example of how not to do April Fools. So remember the Platinum 4, right? This mysterious lineup of projects that they've teased, really trying to galvanize their fan base into sort of the story of them going independent. Well, it turns out the fourth game was an April Fool's joke. Sol Sestra, a sequel to an arcade game from the 80s. Very platinum and actually not that funny as a joke. It seems to have backfired amongst their audience. They don't have any intent to make that game based on their website. Of course, though, what did they then do? Well, a few days later, or well, the next day, they announced, oh no, there is a fifth game in the Platinum 4. And the fourth is just an April Fool's joke. Yeah, what a bungled attempt at humor indeed. That said, this has created a little sub-story which does feed into them teasing the fifth game of the Platinum 4, so maybe it's all just one decently orchestrated marketing campaign that kind of relies on people being, a little bit tense about the April Fool's situation this year. Next up, and on the topic of industry disruption, Gamescom is significantly expanding its digital presence in 2020. We previously knew that they were still prepping for the show to happen, but now, whatever happens, it seems like there will be something major that is at least digital if the main show floor stuff can't happen. In terms of what they do, it's just going to be an expanded version of Jeff Keighley's opening night live. They'll probably do another game festival-like thing, just giving people a bunch of demos in Steam. It's been great for indie discoverability for those titles, so it could be pretty large, especially for those devs. I mean, they'll get wish lists, they'll get a bunch of eyeballs, and of course, for the people who like games, well, you'll get to try out a whole bunch of stuff. Of course, though, losing ticket sales and other revenue from 200,000 plus people is going to sting for the organizers. And once again, as I've already covered in this channel, it will force a lot of vital industry biz dev work to be done remotely. Look, between the three biz dev halls where all the meetings happen, and then all the bars afterwards where a lot more meetings happen, yeah, it's going to slow down just some of the cogs of, really the cogs in the engine of the industry that ultimately does produce games that you play, but it's just a part of the industry that consumers don't really see. But that's also something that will be disrupted here. Then next up, and I guess following The Last of Us stuff, yeah, there's been more of an impact on release dates for games. I'm just going to run through some of them. Minecraft Dungeons now releases May 26th. Wasteland 3 has been pushed to August 28th. And both developers there are citing the challenges of working remotely as the reason for their delays. Then the Switch port of The Outer Worlds, originally due in April, will actually release June 5th. As a small silver lining, the delay does mean that the physical edition will now be a cartridge rather than just a code in a box, which I suppose is nice. Delays are disappointing, of course, but here safety is paramount, and, remote working, it does work decently, but there also can be challenges from time to time, especially when you're making that change quickly. So yes, devs need all the time that they can get here. Overall, I don't think we're going to know the full extent of delays. I mean, there was that Jason Schreier tweet ages ago saying, listen, you are going to see real big delays. Basically, everything after April is, just off the cards. We don't know. And yeah, it seems like Jason was pretty much on the money there. And yeah, I imagine we're just going to see a lot of delays. Certainly, as I'm thinking about the launch lineups for the next generation, those launch lineups, they've got to be holiday 2020, right? Well, what happens when we're dealing with, let's be real, 3 months of shutdown? Maybe even more. What if a second wave comes and then there's another shutdown? Obviously, parts of the games industry are not a massive topic of concern there. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be major delays there, and I've really got to wonder what that's going to do for the release of these consoles, and maybe, I'd actually say maybe it would play into Phil's hands a little bit. If they've been preparing for just a long sort of steady stream of stuff, then perhaps they wouldn't have too much of their plans clustered around that launch window. It's kind of hard to say right now. It's just something we'll have to keep on top of. And there you go. That's it for today's video. I think a video where the news was largely dominated by the obvious stuff that's going on. And I imagine it might be like that for a decent little while indeed. So if you'd like to support us, and only if it is something that you're totally comfortable doing, you can check out the Patreon, and there you will be able to get a big old pack of physical loot, which is pretty cool. And hey, if you've got, D&D playing friends or partners or whatever, I think a lot of that stuff they'd probably appreciate quite a bit. So there's that if you want to help us out. More importantly than anything though, just, stay safe. I wish you all the best. This is a really a pretty hard time for everyone. So stay safe. Medical workers, you are the heroes that are keeping this whole thing going. Thank you. And with that, I'll see you next time.